Hi. Hi, welcome to Meet the Mayor. My name's Jon Olken, and luckily we have the mayor here this morning. Welcome, and glad to see you, and you're looking fine, and I know that you're pretty busy these days.
We're super busy, but thanks for taking the time to meet with me, John. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Why don't we dive right into it? Yesterday's newspaper front page was the pond and the issues with it. Do you want to give us a little background thereon and what's going on and what's the update?
So the pond is an interesting subject. Years ago, we dredged it. About 3 years ago, it was dredged at the recommendation of the DEC. And that pond is a man-made pond. It had a lot of contaminants in it from all the road runoffs. And then when that pond overflows, there's a pipe that takes the overflow into Hook Pond. Mm-hmm. So it was recommended by the DEC that it be dredged, which we did. It was close to $1 million, and that money came from the CPF fund for water quality. So it didn't cost taxpayers any money, which was a great deal for our village.
Sure.
Over the course of time, the pond has been losing a lot of water. So we have a pump there, a well, that keeps the pond up to level. Again, it's a man-made pond. So it's losing water, so we had to hire a company to see where the water is losing from. So it turns out that years ago, the bulkhead that's in the pond around it is actually plastic, and it was put in by some prior administration. And what happens, as opposed to wood expands and contracts, and wood would seal where the water would be leaking, but the plastic doesn't. So we feel a lot of the water is escaping now that there's no muck and mud on it, that the water is escaping through that. So we're working on that issue. And then comes along this very aggressive weed that has started to grow in the bottom of the pond. So basically, when you drive by the pond and you see this looks like lily pads on top of the water, it's the weed, it's the top of the weed that connects all the way to the bottom.
Oh.
And it breaks off very easily. So we have 3 times a week now, we have employees in there cleaning that surface of the pond.
I know, I go by it and I see the 2 guys in the boat.
Right. Right. So we're doing that on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays to try to keep up on it. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we're working with the DEC to come up with a solution to rid the pond of this weed. So there's several different options. One is a chemical that is used to, and it's safe for animals and birds and things like that. And anything that's in the pond, like frogs or turtles, it's supposedly not. Won't hurt them either.
It's not toxic.
Right, not toxic. So we're looking at that option. And there's also another option where you can cover the entire bottom of the pond and kill the weed because it won't get any sunlight. It's very aggressive. You'll see, we'll have the pond completely cleared, and then within 2 days, it's back breaking the surface again.
I know. I go by it frequently, and one day it looks great, and the next day it's all covered again.
It's super frustrating, and the weed grows. The more sunlight we have, the more aggressive the weed is. So, we're moving into summer now. It's going to be warm. We're going to have a lot of sunlight. That it's just going to grow rapidly. So we are working with that. The problem with working with the DEC is it's a long process. So we're talking about an 8-month approval process to rid this weed of the pond, from the pond. So it's not an easy task. It's annoying. Obviously, it's annoying because, I drive by it every day and I don't like the way it looks. It's at the entrance to the village. We want it to be beautiful.
Sure.
We've spent a lot of money making our downtown look really fabulous with the new tree surrounds and Herrick Park that we're improving. So we really are spending a lot of money, painted all the light poles. I mean, it really looks great coming in, except for the pond, which looks like a swamp more than a pond.
That's the trouble. It's the iconic pond. I remember my first time when, hundreds of years ago when I first came here, and I remember seeing that pond for the first time. It was like magic.
It really is.
It really is beautiful.
And if you look back at some of the old photographs that had flowers all around it, and actually Darrell Godfrey, who's a photographer for the Star
Mm-hmm.
actually recommended to me that we replant those flowers. So we actually had an architect draw that up for us. And
Oh, good.
hopefully we can get to that. And
And the town
make
does look great. I mean, we took all those old wooden planters things out of the sides, and the town looks great.
Yeah,
the
we
village,
have-
the
we
village
have,
looks great.
Flower baskets now that we're hanging up, and but it's funny. No matter what you do, there's somebody out there who has either a better way of doing it or who's critical of what you do. And I can tell you a quick, funny story
Please.
that I'd love everybody to hear because it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I had a woman. We hung these beautiful flower baskets from the light poles on Newtown and Maine, and this woman came up to me and said, I don't like the flowers. And I said, why? Are they the wrong color or you like something better? And she said, no, every village has hanging flowers. We were the only village that didn't. And now we're just like all the rest. Again, you can't even make this.
You can't make this stuff up.
nonsense up. I mean, so anyway, it was just, I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I'd heard. I've heard more silly things, but
Yes, I'm sure you have. I think I'm proud. It's part of the job, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It really is. I don't understand how some guys how you can do it sometimes.
well, it's funny, I was chief of police for a long, long time, and
Right.
I thought I had heard everything and heard all the insults. But it's really, now that I'm mayor, it's even worse than when I was police chief.
I'm sure.
Because people somehow feel they have the right to have they do have a right to have an opinion, but the way they come across sometimes is really
Yeah, no, it's
very
it should-
unprofessional,
It
very
should,
nasty.
should always be civil, and that's right. It is our right to say whatever we want about your administration or anybody else's, but it
Correct.
should be civil. Well, speaking of negative comments, let's talk a little bit of the EMS ambulance situation.
Right.
Could you just go it's hard to discern from the newspapers why you did what you did. You know, all the things about, you heard them all. Power grab, don't fix what ain't broken, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So why don't you just start with the background of why you did what led you to that kind of a decision?
Right. So I really have to start back in 2010. So 2010, I was the police chief, and the ambulance has different levels of care providers. So you have an AEMT, who is somebody who can administer drugs and who can do advanced life support. And then you have people who are EMTs, who are more of a level down from that. So they can treat people for fractures, things like that, but they can't administer drugs, and they can do EKGs, but they can't give you that other level, that higher level.
So there's two levels of folks.
Two levels,
ahead.
right. So what happened back in 2010 is it's a tremendous amount of training for the volunteers to become AEMTs, as you can imagine, right? And a lot of the training was west of here. It wasn't really done here. So you'd have to spend days and days on the road, hours and hours of training. So that profession, if you will, those volunteers were getting less and less. So you were almost getting to a situation where you only had EMTs as volunteers, not AEMTs. So a lot of other departments around us, districts, were hiring paid paramedics, which is the highest level other than a doctor that you can really have.
Now, are they AMTs?
They're higher than an
They're
AEMT.
high. They're another level above the
Right.
AMTs.
They're almost equivalent, but a little bit higher,
higher.
than an AEMT.
So you were running out of those kind of folks.
Correct.
Okay. Sorry. Go
So
ahead.
we're running out of volunteer AEMTs. So in 2010, I started approaching the village board about hiring, as police chief, hiring paramedics to supplement and help the volunteers and help our residents.
Right.
It took me 4 years to finally convince them that we needed this. And we were the last department around us, out of the 5 districts that we have around us, we were the last department to hire paramedics.
Right.
Which we finally did. And it was put under my command, under the police department,
Right.
to run that program,
Right.
which we did.
Okay.
So in the meantime, we've hired, before I became mayor, they hired 2 full-time paramedics
Paramedics.
to work. So now in 2020, I became mayor, and we've hired additional paid staff, which is the paramedics. Then I wanted to hire additional EMTs,
Paid EMTs.
paid EMTs,
Okay, so we have
to
paid-
help the
we have-
volunteers,
I'm
because
sorry.
we're starting to lose paid volunteer EMTs. I mean, it's almost a similar situation as we had in 2014, where we're starting to lose volunteers, and it's harder and harder to recruit people. And I think anybody in the Ambulance Association would agree with that statement. So I was trying to provide more paid EMTs, and I was getting some resistance from a few of the members. So, and then some of their policies, I realized that were not working the way I would like to see them work,
Such as?
such as a driver-only volunteer. I would have liked to see the association bring in just drivers,
Who are not trained,
not EMTs, not paramedics, but trained to drive,
but who know how to drive the truck.
but can be trained on how to drive
Okay.
the ambulance.
Right.
Because if you remember now, on a call, you need either a paramedic and you only need two people to go to the hospital. You need a paramedic or an EMT in the back, and you need somebody to drive the ambulance.
drive the truck.
Which could just be a driver.
Right.
So I ran into resistance with the then chiefs of the department, who said, no, our policy is that you have to be an EMT in order to be part of the organization. So then I started doing a little research, and it turns out that the village is almost in contract with this ambulance association. There was no formal written contract, but they have their own set of rules and bylaws, and they're a standalone entity within the state of New York called the East Hampton Village Ambulance Association. In their getting approval to be this corporation within the state, they have a set of corporation papers that say why they were created. They were created to support the ambulance, the volunteer ambulance workers for the village of East Hampton. That's why they were incorporated.
Okay.
So they also became operational of the ambulance. So they have it in their bylaws, anything that has to be changed. So go back to my asking that we do drivers only. It has to go to a bylaws committee. Takes 3 months for the committee to meet and present a bylaw change if they agree to it. And then it goes to the membership, which needs a 2/3 vote to change the bylaw to allow just drivers.
So when you ask them to do this, it's a long process, and they may say no.
Correct.
Okay. So the village owns the ambulances, yes? So you own the equipment,
I own the equipment.
and they operate the equipment under their own rules.
Correct.
Okay. And so go ahead, finish the thought.
And so I'm asking for things to change because what happened in 2020, we had a resident who's been in our fire department for 40 years, who lives 3 minutes from the ambulance barn, if you will, and he was having a medical emergency. The paramedic was there within 3 minutes. The police were there within 3 minutes. The ambulance, they could not get one person out of their ambulance association to drive that ambulance to that person's house. We had to get an ambulance from another jurisdiction to respond, and it took 35 minutes to get an ambulance on scene. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will.
That did it.
And that's when I said, listen, I'm going to start giving you paid EMTs. I'm going to start helping, the volunteers. You have a lot of calls. I'll give you more paid people. And that's when I started getting the resistance. And then some of the paid EMTs were uncomfortable because some of the people that were in the volunteer organization weren't nice to the paid people. So it's a very small group of people throughout the county, and the word spreads very quickly. Why don't work for East Hampton?
So you have those issues, you have the politics of the EMTs themselves, and nobody's in charge.
Correct.
So you felt.
And then the village board and the mayor are the ones responsible to provide ambulance service to its residents and to the contracted areas outside of the village, which are, the town has 2 contracts with us to cover the areas that are between, say, East Hampton Village and Amagansett Village, Springs Village, Bridgehampton. So we cover those areas, and we get a fee from the town residents to do that.
Right.
So all of this, and then I was afraid that the ambulance association, because we were having issues, would just one day say, they're gone.
Yeah.
So we contacted an expert in this field, who's an attorney, who does this for a living, and we said, if they walked out tomorrow, all of them, how would I function? And he said, well, do you have the CON, the Certificate of Need? And I said, well, yeah, we've run an ambulance since the 1920s. I'm sure we have it. Well, it turns out we didn't have it.
Didn't have a CON.
No, because over the years, it had changed. East Hampton Village, all of a sudden it became East Hampton Village Ambulance Association.
Right.
So we asked the state to look back into their records and see when and how did it change from East Hampton Village to East Hampton Village Ambulance Association. This is a very confusing topic if people are trying to follow this. But so the state got back to us and said it was a typo, basically. And so the state reversed it and gave it back to the village. So no one stole the ambulance association.
So technically, you had it all the time.
We had it all the time. Over the years, it morphed into theirs somehow.
So now what changes?
Well, now what changes, and
You now have control of the whole system.
exactly,
Okay.
which we should have had in the beginning, because again, we're basically contracting to this ambulance association, who's a standalone entity, and the village is the one who has the responsibility to provide an ambulance. So if they walked out or we fired them, it still would fall back on the village to provide the ambulance service. So we were just having roadblock after roadblock.
Right.
Another policy that was very annoying to me, and the chiefs, when the new chiefs came in, they agreed and they changed the policy, but then it went to the membership and they reversed it on me.
Okay.
So that was, again, not something that was, and I'll tell you about the policy really quick. The volunteers, and when you hear this, you're going to think this is silly, and I do too, and I didn't know how to fix it, and I thought we had it fixed, and we couldn't fix it. So the volunteers have night squads, right? So if you and I are on a night squad together, let's say we have Monday nights, and another squad has Tuesday nights, and we guarantee we're going to be available for those calls starting at 8 at night till 6 in the morning. And, before I go any further, the volunteers are wonderful people. Everybody really does a great job. I mean, I've started volunteering now, my time, and I'm helping drive the ambulance. I've always been willing to drive, but I'm not willing to be an EMT. So
Sure.
that's not my thing. I'm
No,
not.
and that's a whole other world.
But I'm happy to drive. I'm happy to give my time. So, and I think there's a lot of people out there like me that would be willing to help. So let me just back up. So the other policy was, so we have this night squad where you and I, John, are ready to go at 8 o'clock. Let's say a call comes in at 7:30. They wouldn't let you or I go on that call because we may not be back from the hospital to take our night calls. And I just said, it seems kind of silly. Why don't we deal with the call at hand and worry about the night call? Because even if we get a call at 8 o'clock,
Who was supposed to take the 7:30 call then?
just the other volunteers that may or may not be available.
May or may not.
Right.
There's no guarantee.
There's no guarantees.
But you're there, and why not do it?
Right. If you're available, why not be able to go?
Okay, so there's that.
Instead of going to mutual aid to another department. So that was a very frustrating policy for me.
I can imagine.
They did for a short time. They worked on it. They fixed it. And then it went out the window again. So there was a lot of politics going on.
Sure. So now it's done.
It's done.
It's done.
Now it's a department under
Now,
the village, just like the fire department.
Right. Now, is there a cost difference to the taxpayers for this kind of, the way you set it up?
No, we're still volunteers, and we're supplementing the volunteers with paid people.
Now, a lot of the volunteers went elsewhere for a while.
12 people left.
So if they decide to come back, are they welcome to be with you?
They would have to go through the process and go meet with the chief, meet with the village board, and then that will be decided. They had the opportunity to come over when we had the meetings. They decided to quit. They decided to go to exempt. That's another status they have in their organization. And some of them decided to go serve the community in another department.
Right.
And
So if they wanted to come back, they have to be re-examined and reapproved to do it. Now, so since people have left, are you fully staffed enough now?
yeah, I mean, we're accepting 4 more volunteers at today's meeting. We've hired 2 more full-time EMTs. So right now we have 2 full-time paid people, 1 paramedic, 1 EMT around the clock.
Okay, great.
And then with we brought in 10 drivers, new drivers, just drivers. So right away, if you get a driver and an EMT, right away we have 2 rigs
Right.
ready to go.
Right.
And we only have 3.
That's terrific.
And we've had multiple calls. These last few weeks have been very, very busy.
So how do you measure success? Is it response time, or how do you know that you've done the job?
Well, we'll know in a few months. We'll look at our mutual aids since May 1st and say until September.
Right.
And we'll see if our mutual aids, and we'll compare them to the last year's.
Right. So you'll have a report card.
Yes.
And you'll be able to see what the issues are and how
Exactly.
you did.
If
and-
this is working, it's not where I can tell you right now it's working.
Right.
It's working
And
tremendous.
all of this will be made public, I assume.
What's that?
All this will be made.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
Yeah,
everybody
we'll
will
be happy to make it
right. So
public.
everybody will see if it worked or didn't work.
Right. And then, I read a couple of different things in the local paper, and people are afraid that the taxes, I mean, we've lowered taxes. We're going to announce in the next couple of days that we're lowering taxes again for village residents. This is the second year in a row that we're lowering taxes. It's not a lot, not a big lower, but it's definitely lower.
Okay.
And-
I'm moving to the village.
Yeah, you're welcome to move to the village.
If you do that. Well, that's true. Thank you.
That's a very complicated.
It is complicated, and you really put
Complicated, but I think what people have to understand is we're losing volunteers. It's harder and harder for people to commit to volunteer because a lot of people that live out here are working 2 or 3 jobs
Yep.
to support their mortgages, and they have kids. And so it's harder and harder to get young people interested in this profession. So we're moving more and more to paid. It's coming. All the departments, we meet monthly, the commissioners of all the departments on the East End, and everyone's having very similar situations. So
Sure.
we're moving that way. It's coming faster than we think.
Good. Well, that was now I understand. That was a good explanation.
John.
Thank you. Let's move on to something a little more fun. Herrick Park.
Herrick Park.
I noticed that the tennis courts are down, and the baseball field is being fixed, and there's a big fence at the other end. Is it a 2-phase thing for the park?
Yeah, so when we started this project, we were going to have a phase 1 and then a phase 2. Phase 1 is basically the entire rectangle sports fields, and phase 2 is going to be the area that comes off of Newtown Lane with all the children
Right.
activities. So the first project was a sports field. Originally, the plan was to switch the tennis court and the softball field so that the noisier sports were closer to
Street.
the parking lot.
Right.
But as we came out of COVID, prices have all gone up. The estimates that we originally had were much higher now. So it saved us over $1 million to leave everything in place because of all the undergrounding wires and everything that's there. So, and when I first took office, we created a non-for-profit foundation where people could donate money. And one of our first project is Herrick Park through the foundation. So the
So this
foundation,
is all done on donations.
correct. The foundation raised over $2 million. And we now revamped phase 1 to phase 1A, which is just the tennis court and the softball field.
Softball field.
So that is almost completed. The bathrooms are also all redone. That was not part of the Herrick Park phase. That was a separate
Right.
project that we did. But we're going to unveil it all at the same time, and it's soon. I don't know the exact date yet, but we're going to unveil that soon.
So the other half of the park is
The other half of the park is actually in good shape. It's the boys' baseball field, 7th and 8th grade baseball field. It's actually in good shape. What we would like to do is move it back and align it with the new tennis courts
right.
and change the backstops out to make it like our new backstops. They're all black and they have nice little dugouts. It really is. If you have to drive by, I mean, you should drive by there and take a look at it.
looks
It's
nice.
really coming along very nicely.
So while you were doing that, we had the pickleball
Yeah, so
to do.
yeah, the pickleball, it's kind of, what happened was we did a survey. The village board sent out a survey to village residents, and all the village residents agree, by majority, the village residents want pickleball in the park. And that was the survey we sent out. So that is going to be in phase 2 or 2A. We don't know yet. So what we thought we would do is on the tennis courts, we would just double stripe one of the courts so people could at least enjoy pickleball while we figure out and raise more money for the next phase. And one of the neighbors made a complaint, and we agreed. So we took that out of the plan.
Right.
And then he also sued us on top of it, even after we agreed to remove it.
Just for something to do.
Yeah, well, you know, he doesn't want anything in the park.
Well,
So
I
he
know.
doesn't want pickleball. You know, we have an idea of a,
It reminds me of the people who live by the airport, and they complain.
oh, don't go there.
So no, I said, oh, didn't you know there was an airport there when you bought the house? And I know the house you're talking about, and it's right behind there.
It is. And it was right next to where the basketball court
Yeah,
was. And
yeah.
that basketball court we took out because it was in such bad shape. And to the Star's editorial, you know, he doesn't have the courtesy to call us and ask any questions, so he just writes fiction, basically. That court that was dedicated to Roy Mabry, we contacted the family, and we asked them if it would be okay to remove those courts because they're in disrepair. We saved the beautiful plaque that honors Roy.
Right.
And we explained to them that we're going to reinstall that basketball court at a later date and a later time. And the family was very understanding of what we were doing and had no issues with it. So to read the editorial in the Star, it looks like we've totally forgot about it. And it's not the case. And if somebody would just pick up the phone and have the courtesy to call us, we could explain that to them before they wrote their article.
For all those pickleballers out there, there will be a pickleball court someplace in the park. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
we don't know. I mean, we're trying to be thoughtful of the neighbors. It is a loud sport. I'm not sure what we're going to do with that yet. We have to, you know, when we get closer and we unveil a new plan, we'll have public input, and then, you know, so it's in the works, but we don't know exactly what we're going to do in phase 2.
So the park is just about ready to go?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
great.
we're really excited about it because you know that we have the Artist-Writers game there every August, and it's
Yes, I
going to
do.
be a brand-new field for them to play on. It's
gonna be great.
Very excited about that.
Great. Well, I think our time is actually up.
We only got 2 questions.
I don't know how we did that.
3 questions.
3 questions.
That's amazing.
Well,
Well, I look forward to the next time, John.
well, me too.
I
me
enjoy
too.
doing these.
Terrific. No, I enjoyed having you.
Thank you.
And so that's it. I'm Jon Olken signing off. We'll see you next month. Yes?
month.
Next month. Every month we'll talk.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. So long.